Well, good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you this morning. It's a beautiful day here in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen and Kosapsan families and ancestors. My name is Catherine Atmansky, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the director of the School of Leadership Studies at Royal Roads University. I'll invite you just to take a look at your device. Everything looks a little bit differently depending on what kind of device you're using, but for the most part, toward the bottom of your screen, you should be seeing a chat button. You can see it's circled in red on our slide here. And I would invite you now, if you'd like to introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining from, perhaps which part of the world you're joining from, or even if you know the ancestral names, the Indigenous place name where you're joining from today, I would invite you to include that in your introduction as well, just so we get a little bit of a sense of who's here with us. I'm seeing all kinds of wonderful new friends and some familiar faces and names as well. So welcome to one and all. It's lovely to be here with all of you. Let's just move along here, Selena, to the next slide. And here we'd like to formally acknowledge the ancestral lands that Royal Roads University rests upon. So I'll read this out here. Royal Roads University acknowledges that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Kwasapsum, the Esquimalt, and Lekwungen Songhees ancestors and families. It is with gratitude that we now learn and work here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, staff, and all of our community members here in this Zoom room come together. And I also will say that we have learned that the lands upon which Royal Roads University rests are a traditional gathering place. Traditionally, this has been a place where people of different nationalities, different nations, different peoples have come together to learn and celebrate and be together. And so we are replicating that in a virtual world here on this Zoom call as we come together to learn from one another. So we're honoring the legacy of these lands in our work here today. Haishka Siem, which means thank you, esteemed ones. Selena, next slide, please. So here I'll acknowledge that this particular webinar, and actually a whole series of webinars, has been hosted by the Masters of Arts in Global Leadership. And I can see a few familiar faces. Brenda, you're popping up on my screen here. Hello. And others who are connected with the Masters of Arts in Global Leadership. But maybe some of you are just curious about the webinar topic, or maybe you're curious about the Masters of Arts in Global Leadership or some of the other embedded certificates and diploma programs in global leadership. So if you stay on right till the end, we'll offer a little bit more information about those programs for those of you who are here to learn more about that. And in the meantime, I'd like to hand the microphone, the virtual microphone, over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Wanda Kraus, who will be introducing our wonderful speaker today. Over to you, Wanda. And thanks everyone for joining what it promises to be an excellent session this morning. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Catherine. And welcome everyone. I'm sure we have people coming in from other parts of the world as well. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Wanda Kraus, and I am located and speaking to you from the Wasana traditional family lands, which is just right outside the university. And I'm really grateful to be not only speaking to you from these lands, but having the opportunity to live here and work here as well. So we're here at our fifth webinar from the series we've had so far. So far, we've spoken to food security. So there's a number of issues and challenges as well. We try to look for opportunities where we can speak to how we can contribute to betterment, or how we can transform issues that we're all concerned about. And so we've talked about internationalization so far. We've introduced an Indigenous approach to food security being a major issue and coming to the forefront, especially as we look at what's happening in the world with the situation of Ukraine. In terms of internationalization, we've touched on, and we do within the program as well, touch on many aspects from a systems perspective. And we've talked a little bit about planetary health. That was our first webinar to kick off the series and why it matters. It integrates and connects to all the topics that we cover actually in the Global Leadership Program. As Dr. Catherine mentioned, we'll be talking about the suite of programs we have at the end of the webinar, so I'll leave that and introduce our speaker for today. Delmar Tobin is a part-time faculty in Human Resources Management at Lawrence Kinlan School of Business, Fanshawe College in London, Ontario. Tobin is a member at large of the London and Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership Central Council. It's a non-for-profit organization designed to help newcomers to Canada and help them integrate into the communities that they come to. He also volunteers with the City of London, supporting the implementation of the city's community diversity and inclusion strategy. Before migrating to Canada, Delmar led human resources management projects in public and private sectors in organizations mostly in Guyana, which has led to his interest now within Canada in diversity management. Right now, Delmar is in the DBA program at Royal Roads University, and his research interest is based upon his experience coming to Canada. And his interest is focused mostly on skilled migrant workers and their integration into Canadian workplaces. So his research is aimed at management practices around equity, diversity, and inclusion, specifically thinking around inclusive leadership. Tobin holds a Master's of Science in Human Resources Management and Development, and that's from the University of Manchester, and also a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from the University of Guyana. So really, really grateful and pleased to have you with us today, Delmar. I'm looking forward to your presentation, as are many people with us today. I won't speak to what you'll be touching on, but I'm just really glad you are talking to many of the issues that have been at the forefront of our thinking, especially as we've just celebrated International Women's Day, and must be reminded with presentations like this as well that it's not a particular day that we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's every day that we need to think about the practices, the frameworks, policies, and how we can contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Delmar is bringing women as a case study to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, among many other aspects. And he has a couple of polls to kick us off with so that he can also get an orientation as to where your focus is today and where your interest is, and he'll align to where he can support us best. So thank you, Delmar, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Wanda, for such a warm introduction. It's always happy to hear you describe the work that I do. And I'm also happy to say that the support you have given so far, and Wanda did not say that she's my supervisor, my dissertation supervisor, and we are going to be working together for a very long time. So I'm coming from Southwest Indigenous lands in Southwestern Ontario. I'm in London, as Wanda said, and I've been here for just about 4 years, and I'm happy to be closing out this series of discourses on for the leadership faculty at Royal Roads. But my topic is diversity is not enough, and as Wanda said, there are going to be two polls, but there are going to be two polls that I would like to use to kind of position my discussions, and in looking at this topic, diversity generally is such a wide area, and I had to think about how best I can position my experience to date and to create an environment for discussion and focus on one of the couple of key areas, kind of three key areas organizations can focus on to ensure that there is an inclusive society. Can I have the next slide, please? So my objective today is to discuss the organization's socialization process from outsider to insider, and mechanisms that lead organizations to organization identification, belonging for diverse employees. The second objective I have today is to discuss how organizations and how outsider to insider progression can be measured, and the thirdly, to explore effective dashboards, scorecards, and other communication tools to tell the story of the journey. So what I'm trying to do is three kind of basic stuff. I'm trying to say to link diversity and inclusion, or diversity, moving from diversity inclusion into the normal organization socialization process. Um, what has been happening is diversity has taken on, because of a number of other factors. Diversity, inclusion, and equity is taking on a role into itself. But then I'm in this session. I'm linking it into the organizational socialization process, because that's really what it is, and that's those tools are kind of helpful in creating an inclusive environment that supports diverse workforce. Next slide, please, Celine. So let's quickly go through some definitions. These are the ones that I like because they're quite simple. Diversity speaks the difference between employees, and any attribute that may invoke perception that the co-worker is different. The other one talks about traits, both visible and not, of groups or two of more people, two or more people. So one talks about difference, one talks about traits, visible or not, between two or more people. Equity refers to the fairness in the treatment of people in terms of both opportunities and outcomes. And this is important because generally, when people come to the work, when someone comes to the workforce, it's about opportunities, having the fair opportunities and fair outcomes, not only opportunities. Next slide, Celine. Inclusion is important. I really like this definition because this definition really speaks to what I'm studying at the moment. Because what inclusion, according to Nishi and Rich, is to the extent an organization is inclusive, to the extent that its policies, practice, and leadership demonstrate that all individuals in the organization have valuable experiences, skills, ideas to contribute, and can integrate their uniqueness without pressure to assimilate and in order to be accepted. And this is really key to my study because um, you want to be yourself, and an inclusive environment talks about you being allowed to be yourself, and you can do better. You do more the best work when you're yourself, not someone else. So I like this definition because of the emphasis on not assimilation and more into integration. Right. Next slide, Selena. So so the formula to the formula that's emerging from the definitions there, and I've seen it around where a number of persons in this field have come up with the same formula. Diversity plus equity plus inclusion equals organization identity, belonging in both organization and society. So once you have all these things happening, where you have a diverse workforce and there are equitable processes and systems, and there's some level of inclusion, and there's inclusive a climate, then you have what you call organizational identity, belonging, where somebody wants to belong to the organization and to the society, and then by inference engage and contribute to that environment and that society. So the next slide. So the first poll I would like to ask is uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion statements and policies. To what extent in your organization you have diversity statements and policy, diversity statements and policy without target, diversity statement and policy with targets? Just about 5, 10 seconds, please. Okay. Okay. Now, yeah, this is insightful. This kind of your response here kind of mirror what some of the data is saying about one uh, DA statements without targets. For 70% with targets, 53, 54% without targets with statements, and no diversity statements and policies. Okay, next slide, please. So why are public statements important? Um, I'm looking at the case of the diversity and leadership report of Canadian public companies, and I'm emphasizing here on just one aspect of diversity, which is gender. We can have all the other aspects of diversity that, I'm going to focus here on gender. And why public statements are important, because let's look at this graph, and it quickly says 2021 proportion of women directors in all companies. No women, 16%. More than one woman, 53%. One woman. Now, this was done last year, but it's the beginning of a 4-year program reporting where there's a movement in a certain direction. So this is just a recap of where mid last year the data was showing, where more than one woman was 53%, no woman 60%, and one woman 31%. Can you show the next slide, please? Okay, so let's look at the movement, and it's key that you observe the data at the top that says total companies that disclose, because these are companies that were required to disclose, and as you can see, from 2018 it started with 680, but in 2021 it was 629. And so there was a reduction on company actually disclosing. But that may have affected the percentage. As you can see, there's a rise in percentage from 2.96 in SPS and P and TSC companies to 3.72, and the same percentage can be seen from 26% to 33% from 2017 to 2021. So the declaration, a public-facing document, is quite important. Even though the stats is not what you expect it to be, a public-facing document is quite important. The next slide, please. So and that's important to set targets. So even though we might not, the increases might not be, as expected, it's important to set targets. So, for instance, targets for representation of women on boards, you recognize in your quick survey, right? It moves from 2017 to 2021 from 47% to 72%. In the same type of companies where they adopted targets of having women on boards. And the document that you've seen at the beginning, the chart that you see at the beginning, is a representative of adopting a target and moving towards that goal. Next slide, please. So the second poll I want to publish is what What is your role in your organization? Is it a hierarchical, supervisory, functional, inclusive, all of it? Okay, just about. Okay, now thanks. Now this is interesting because this poll, I'm looking at the poll and I'm thinking that social inclusionary aspect. Most people go to work to be in a different functions. Most times when you join an organization, it's for you to be in a role. So it might be a supervisory position, it might be a functional position where you have a technical skill. But part of that whole dynamics is should be something that's inclusionary in the sense that you join a group or you're not in a group. You can see yourselves contributing to the company, not necessarily through your technical skills. And one example, and Selena, can you go to the next slide? One example I've had is that even as an HR practitioner, when I move into a company to work, I kind of try to determine where that company is on some of the issues that are I'm passionate about, and try to move those issues along the way. So every company may have a different level of implementation on issues that you're passionate about, and most of that have to do with that social inclusionary component because you're employed for your skill, and that's covered. That's why you're interviewed and employed. So making the case, there are three things to make the case for those persons who have no target or no target or no statement. One is framing. What is the problem? I've had people who reach out to me and said, "Listen, Delmar, you seem to be connected. We need to have somebody of diversity in our team. Can you find someone?" That's like framing. What is the dilemma? What's happening? And in any company, you can have that discussion. And why is it necessary? You need to advocate why this needs to happen. And obviously, that person did because it didn't look well. And then you can talk about illustrating how other companies are doing it, and then bring that discussion around how can we get that done. The next slide, please, Selena. Now, this is a very difficult slide. I mean, it's a very thing slide, but it's kind of spell out the organizational socialization process. What happens when somebody joins the organization? You're moving from an outsider to the insider position. From an outsider, what you're doing, you've joined, you've applied, you've gotten a job, and you're excited from an outsider to get in. And when you're insider, you understand what's happening, and you can now contribute. You're now engaged. You can now contribute. Where the trouble is between number one and number two, anticipating to be into a company and actually get into that company. Where inclusionary measures can be implemented is in those two top the anticipatory socialization and the encounter. Those are where the challenges of measuring diverse workforce takes place. For instance, in the case of orientation, how is the orientation? Is it a case where when the person gets a job, the person is given a contract and then wait until the first day to turn up and then learns about the company? What happens between that to bridge the uneasiness? And think about it for the normal individual. And the normal individual, that can be problematic. That can be traumatic when you're leaving one job to the other. When you're looking at a diverse person that is moving into an environment, that is even double fold. For instance, in my case of a skilled migrant or from a migrant who's another diverse work person or a diverse group, moving from a country to another country to the environment that is totally unknown, to systems that are totally unknown, can be problematic. And that's where the inclusive aspect takes place, right? To the extent to which organizations um, have those internal dynamics that move the person along and allow the person to be comfortable and understanding the roles, the processes, the clarity of role, the processes that are required. For instance, as simple as payroll, how to add themselves to payroll, how to add the SIN number, why it's important. Those are things that, as you move from organization to organization, may differ. All right, so those are on those grounds. I think those internal systems comes into play. Let's go to the next slide, please. No, so what really is required is, one, the individuals need to make sense and determine how their role and their experience can impact the organization. And that's where the first part of that mechanism is making sense. Am I valued? Am I considered a valuable asset? Would my skills be recognized? Is this group open to some of the thoughts that I have about the way I do my work? And those sense making determines one way or the other whether the person fits into the organization or not, right? Self-enhancement speak to whether there are programs there to move the person along. For instance, if it's a case where the person have a difference in language, are there programs to help the person to speak the local language in a manner that makes the person useful, right? If it's a case of understanding organizational culture, are there programs that are there that allow the person to socialize so they can learn the culture faster and also bring their culture or their understanding of things to the discussion? And on uncertainty reduction, speak to all those processes that kind of spell stability, where you don't have to worry about whether this job is going to leave you, whether when you don't have to worry about the next paycheck, when you don't have to worry about the nature of your contract, those uncertainties. So those are the three mechanisms that are key, I think, to lead towards our organizational identification, where the individual, especially of a diverse group, can feel can identify with the company. The next slide, please, sir. So what should it look like? It should look like this. At the beginning of the phase, you should be hearing statements like, I'm excited about my new job. I have met my team, and they're excited to hear about my experiences and skills that I bring to my new role. Those are the type of conversations you want with somebody coming in the first phase. And the second phase, the time runs fast, meaning I enjoy working here. That kind of sum up the feeling. And the last stage, I love working here. I would not go back to my old job or my country. So that's some of the feeling of change and acquisition. Next slide. So some strategies. Sorry about that. Some strategies. One pays great importance on structuring institutional manage and institutionally managing onboarding processes of new employees. Not only for diverse, but for everyone. But it benefits the diverse person, the diverse workforce more, because they need to understand where they're going and how their specific skill fits in. So it's important that the onboarding process is effective, and it's thorough in the sense that it takes all the different components of the individual expectation, right? It covers all the individual components of the individual expectation. Create opportunity for self-enhancement, meaning have internal programs not only for your staff, but also that covers those diverse staff to move them to where you are. Because again, when the selection took place, the skills were known. You know that the person have the skill. So it's that social aspect that you need to move along. So easily get them involved in different, I'll talk about that in the latter slides. I've got 2 slides to go. And the third part is creating an environment that is stable, presenting the organization as a provider of stability. So when the person comes to work, they're not worried about their future, about their homes, like I can't pay my bill. Make sure that the payments are on time. There's that hygiene factor to make sure these common things that are expected are there. The next slide, please, Sylvia. So opportunities to do that, to engender action, like fixed and formal events. You want in your annual planning session, you want to be talking about where are we on our on our inclusion? Where are we diverse enough based on our clients, what we're doing? And where are we in moving for inclusion? How are people feeling? And that should be discussed at your annual planning sessions. Setting targets there. Yearly socials, you should be introducing people and your diverse groups in your yearly social. Managing meetings, you should be adopting the process where at your meetings you understand what might be the direction the company needs to be going, and have some time slotted for that discussion as part of the agenda. Staff general meetings and monthly meetings, the same thing. But what is more important is that those variable events, those informal events, outside of your formal structure, people talk. People meet in the passenger and talk, and people form groups. So when we go back to the first poll about socialized inclusion, that's a role that everyone can play, because people meet and they form groups and they discuss. So at board days, at farewells, those are opportunities to discuss, to talk, to include people, to include diverse groups, right? And the next slide. And finally, telling the story, because as you go through these processes, because we're moving from setting targets to inclusion, as you go through the story, you need to be able to tell stories. You need to have dashboards saying where you are, where we're going, because those informal discussions those stories are being told. Even the negative stories are being told in those informal discussions, and those stories are formalized, right? Into office communication. You're talking about where you're going, so you continue to communicate the direction. Reward and recognition programs along that line, development case studies of successes and channels. And then the most important aspect, I think, is leadership communication. Communication of where you're taking the company, where the company is going, and the vision and what's happening. Where are we in the journey? So I think those are key areas. The last slide I think I have, if you're thinking about dashboards, there are some solutions that help in large companies that you can use, inclusive dashboards and diversity dashboards. And there are some companies, they are not kind of plugging those companies. But then what is more important is for you to understand what narratives you should be listening, you should be hearing from employees, especially of a diverse background. What narratives you should be hearing, and how to measure those, whether to understand that those narratives determine which direction the company is going. Okay, and I think that's all. There's the next slide. Okay, those are my sources, and I thank you for listening. If I have not taken up more than my time.
Thank you so much, Delmar. This is so rich. I can't actually cover everything without leaving major gaps, because you've offered so much to think about. But I'll attempt to just touch on a couple of areas and highlight a couple of areas that you've presented this morning. And perhaps we can go into those, or, those of you who are joining us, please also think about the questions that you have for Delmar. What I loved is that you highlighted the socialization process that happens within organizations when we're talking about strategies for inclusion. So moving beyond simply thinking about diversity, thinking about how we can actually take action that is measurable, and tells a story. I think we forget often the importance of what you mentioned, the narrative, and who is narrating, and capturing those in storytelling and measuring. So, you know, as a method, coming forward with listening to those who have something to say about their experience and what they want and what the needs are that they have. So perhaps, you know, in a little bit, I know that we'll have some questions. We can talk a little bit more about the socialization process, because this is not an approach that we commonly hear as important. And it, as you explained it, it just, for me, makes a lot of sense, because you spoke to both the formal and the informal. In fact, you emphasized the role we can all play in the informal. So it's, we don't have to be in a specific position in HR to be able to implement some of the strategies. We can all do this, we can all participate, and it's a responsibility for everyone who's in an organization. So thank you for that emphasis. I'll maybe leave it at that, because there's so much more we can tease out. But what I'll do is invite those of you who have questions to perhaps either raise your hand and or put in the chat any of the questions you might have. So Delmar, there's one question I see that we can begin with. It's from Caitlin. In your research, do you see it? Have you?
Yeah, I see it. I see it. Yeah, I can. Yeah. Yes. But I can't. I cannot pin my. There are a number of companies that are doing much. So there are some companies that are doing much of that seems to doing the right. Yeah, there are companies that are doing it. But I have not. I cannot really pinpoint that directly, because that's not the nature. My research have not gone there as yet. But if you look at those bigger companies like Google and the type of interaction they are having, for instance, inviting someone to talk about something that's topical, and you look at those persons in the audience who are asking questions and who are discussing, you realize that it's a wide group of persons who are concerned about it. So there are companies that are doing that, and I'm not saying, I have not done any research particularly with. I'm not in the field as yet, but it would be good to see how that works out when I embark on my research, on my actual research in Canada, actually. I don't know if that answers your question, Caitlin. Okay.
So if there's any more questions, please feel free to put your to raise your hand with the use of the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, as well. In the chat, you can just put your question in, and either Delmar or I can read it out. In the meantime, Delmar, you spoke a little bit to action in query. I'm wondering if you can explain that approach or that method a little bit more for the organizational setting to really get at those narrations you mentioned.
Yeah, what I use action inquiry, because especially in relation to the diversity or issues issues in relation to diverse workforce or diversity. And it's always problematic. And generally what happens is that to raise that discussion, it's a problem. And the action inquiry allows you to do that. First, it allows you to frame what is it you're talking about specifically, so that everybody's on board about what the discussion is. Sometimes we are seeing the same thing, but we're seeing it from different perspectives. And because of that, if you do not frame what is it, the observation, so everybody said, okay, we're seeing the same thing, it can take the discussion in different ways, especially in relation to diversity. Because for me, I might be looking at something from the perception, for the thing that gender may not be an issue, where somebody said, yes, it is. So you need to clarify that. The second aspect of that is to, after framing, you need to advocate why is it necessary for us to deal with this, and then illustrate to say how will it work, and then the final part of that is to say, okay, let's work together to get there. So it's more an inclusive tool. This action inquiry is more an inclusive tool to get the discussion moving in the direction and brings everybody on board. I think one of the areas in which that happened, I didn't mention it in my presentation, but there are diversity and inclusion committees that are forming, and one of the methods they can use is the same thing, have an action inquiry in moving that discussion about diversity. What is it you want to see? Framing that, and then what's the target? Moving that to through those stages. I don't know, Wanda, does that explain it clearly?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially,
Go ahead.
no, I said especially when you're having those difficult conversations where because people have different views and their views are valid. Inclusion is about the difference, and you're bringing difference together. And we're saying that the strength come with differences. So how do you square that? Especially if you want a group to move in a certain direction that's positive for the organization, you have to find a method, and it's a kind of a very inclusive tool that helps.
I have another question in the meantime. I hope I'm not taking up too much time with questions, but in the interim, I'm thinking about, you spoke about committees being organized within organizations and obviously educational institutions as well. And I'm wondering, in terms of, you spoke to working together, beyond action inquiry, what are some other strategies to move some of the ways of coming together in committees or other forms to identify those targets and share the responsibility of ensuring we meet those targets? So it doesn't rest, again, simply on specific committees that are passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, but as principle, we move this forward. So how can we get everyone to work together, as you've mentioned?
Okay, but that's always a task, Wanda. Thanks for the question. That's always a task. But then there are other tools within the organization that helps. For instance, if at first we can identify where we're going, what the targets are, and if by identifying those, the leader can say what the direction is. The committees don't have to take the burden, the heavy lifting, because what the committees are going to be doing is give it kind of best case type of work, in the sense they're going to be doing a lot of research or whatever. But then at the level of the departments, there where this inclusion and engagement and belonging takes place is with supervisor and staff, and there's some responsibility for action to take place there. If you have let's say for instance some scorecard or dashboard, or you have some objectives that are broad, that can be broken down to departments where there's a responsibility of each supervisor to act in a certain way. There's a responsibility of HR to take these steps in recruitment to ensure these things happen. So it can be implemented across the company, and it doesn't have to lend to the discussion, the forming of committees. But when the committee is formed, right? What the committee needs to have that mandate to say, okay, where our strengths are going to be, and what the limitations are going to be for the committee, and push back to the wider organization through the leadership to ensure that some of these objectives are implemented. Right? But I see leadership as being very important, because one of the major hurdle has to be the leadership. The leadership have to be inclusive and to be at the at the front of this charge.
Delmar, I have one more question that's on my mind. Since you mentioned there's a couple of issues in terms of culture to consider. One is not only helping newcomers, and especially those from backgrounds, that are quite different from the culture of an organization, to integrate, but not so much the culture of the organization as the focus, but rather the culture of those who are coming to the organization as focus. How do you do that? How do you help? You mentioned helping, so how do you help those who are coming with slightly different cultures from the dominant culture of an organization, not only integrate, but bring their culture in so that it's appreciated, embraced, and worked with?
Okay, yeah, that's always a challenge. I can give you a live example. For instance, where I'm from, there are different cultures, and they're Indo, Afro, and different cultures, indigenous cultures. And in the workplace, when I started that job, there were it was kind of non-inclusive in the sense that people were concerned about some of these values. So one of the ways of doing that is having some awareness. Some of the events we I promoted were cultural day, when you dress in the culture of the other person, and there is a little session of awareness. So it breaks down that barrier, and even though there are differences, it's kind of porous because people kind of understand what is happening, and they kind of, the person, by being able to talk about their culture, it's also, continue to feel whole, in the sense they continue to say, this is what I represent. And so it's a learning process for both. However, it's always better if the organization can orchestrate that, can plan that, and create a framework that is safe for that type of interaction to take place. And I had to build the framework to say, okay, the limit of this, and what you can do and what you cannot do because of the nature of the environment. But it's going to change because some cultures are not going to be as dramatically different to others, right? But you can create that framework for the sharing to take place and for that person to remain whole, rather than not being a part, trying to assimilate a different culture. I don't know if that answers the question,
Oh,
Wanda,
no,
but that's what
yeah.
the part,
Oh,
that's what I
beautiful.
think.
Yeah, I really appreciate your emphasis here too on ensuring the person remains whole. Thank you for that framing too. And I'll just highlight, Delmar, in the chat, we've got several comments. Thank you, excellent work. Also, frame, advocate, educate. I love that. I'm keeping that on a sticky note by my desk. Thank you, Delmar. This is such valuable information and structure for raising awareness about the issues and perceptions. Much appreciate your work. Yes, and I'll add to that. Thank you for offering also structure for helping us think through steps and processes. I think, that's an extremely important aspect, with targets, of course. So I'll, and then I'll also read, thank you, can't wait to review the slides and keep them close. So lots of appreciation expressed in the chat. I'd love to invite everyone to, either with the reactions button, to just give a thanks and clap to Delmar. Thank you so much, Delmar, for joining us and bringing such rich information and insights. And with that, I'll pass it back to Selena. Selena has a few more slides for us to work through and introduce. Thank you, Selena.
Thank you so much, Wanda and Delmar. Oh my gosh, my mind is still spinning from that session. Thank you so much. I am absolutely resonating with the structure that you shared and how I can apply that to my role within my organization. We are so lucky to have you cap off our From Local to Global Leadership webinar series that we've been running for the past few months. For those of you who are perhaps new to our series, we just wanted to quickly flash a slide that shows all of the different topics that we've covered. And FYI that the fun has not stopped, that we are going to continue hosting these sort of special topic sessions to help you get a feel for some of the things that we cover within our Master of Arts in Global Leadership programming. So if you're interested in continuing on and getting notified about upcoming webinars, feel free to take a peek into the chat box, as we have a link there that'll help you get connected and make sure you're receiving our webinar invitations. We also want to make sure that if you have any questions based on what you've heard today or within any component of our series, that you know where to find us. So if you're interested in talking more about any of the topics that we explored within the series, you can always connect with Wanda via the School of Leadership here at Royal Roads University. And you can find them at leadership.admin@royalroads.ca. And if you have any questions about any of our programs here at Royal Roads University, or particularly our Master of Arts, graduate diploma, and graduate certificates in global leadership, both our blended and fully on-campus offerings, please connect with our offices. Our enrollment team is always here to continue the conversation. And if you're joining us as a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, landed immigrant, or refugee, you can connect with us at learn.more@royalroads.ca. And if you're joining us as an international citizen or temporary resident, our counterparts in our international office are so excited to chat. So you can find them at learn.more.international@royalroads.ca, or you can connect with them directly via WhatsApp if you scan the code you see on the slide here, which we'll be sure to include in our follow-up communications as well. So with that, we have come to the end of our formal slide deck today, as well as our Q&A. So before we wrap up, perhaps I can pass the microphone back to Delmar. Delmar, was there any last words you wanted to share before we close out today?
Hi, Selene. Yeah, and not really. I'm happy to see that, Jonathan, and the comments. This is an area that I'm passionate about. I was hoping I could answer some of the questions about the real type of organizations that I practice in. Some of these have these practices in place, but well, hopefully I'll be able to get that type of information down the line. And this is work that has to be continued. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And we're so lucky that you are just in the middle of your journey with Royal Roads University right now. So I can't wait till we have you back and just be able to learn even more throughout your journey in our Doctor of Business Administration program.
Okay, thank you.
Wanda, was there anything else you wanted to share before we close out today?
I'd just like to capture what you just said, Delmar, which is we have a lot of work ahead of us. Yes, and Selena, what you just said, not just Delmar, we're all in the middle of making these things happen. So thank you to all of you who have joined us to hear Delmar's presentation and your interest. And just, to wish you a beautiful day or an evening wherever you are, and look forward to seeing you all again, hopefully with future webinars. Take care. Have a beautiful day. Thank you, Delmar.
Bye-bye, everyone.